Why is there fear of death?
How do patients describe having had a near-death experience?
A patient of mine told me, while her body was clinically dead and resuscitation maneuvers were being performed, she described everything that was happening in the emergency room, which has several areas. Next, they mention that they contact some beings. They call them beings of before their near-death experience. They had a physical defect, even some blind from birth. The patients, during the time interval, they experienced their NDE, their near-death experience. The physical defect disappeared.
Max Planck, Pauli, Einstein, Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, Eddington. And then the conclusion I mentioned. Do you know what it is?
What is it?
They pursue and seek and demonstrate that there is a primary inner ray, a universal quantum consciousness.
Welcome to a new episode of ConPdePodcast. As you can see, we have changed the set once again. We are at the Planas Clinic in Barcelona because, well, for those who don't know the Planas Clinic, it is the clinic of Dr. Planas, who, as you well know, has been on the channel, a very good friend of mine. And, well, it is the largest cosmetic surgery clinic in Europe. So, well, they have let us use it today for filming, which is amazing. I imagine there will be shots appearing while I speak. Dr. Jorge Planas has let us use it to record the interview, today's interview. You know I'm from Madrid, so I've come all the way to Barcelona just to meet today's guest and to have the opportunity and, of course, the pleasure of interviewing him. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the guest. Our guest today is a surgeon at the Hospital of Barcelona and president of the senior section of the College of Doctors of Barcelona, as well as of the Association of Senior Doctors of the Bellvitge University Hospital. In addition to the 92 medical articles, he has written a book about pancreatic cancer and received the Professional Excellence Award from the Official College of Doctors of Barcelona. It is a true pleasure to have here today in a new episode of ConPdePodcast, Dr. Manuel Sans Segarra. How are you?
Good morning. It is a pleasure and an honor to be among you with the idea of trying to clarify important aspects that I think can help open minds, awaken minds, which I believe and hope is one of the purposes of everything I am doing.
Well, today is, first of all, doctor, I already told you off camera, but I'll say it in front of the audience. It is a true pleasure to have you here. I discovered you a year ago, and well, I have watched a lot of your interviews and lectures because I find them very interesting. Today we are going to talk about topics that, as you have rightly said, are going to open minds. They are going to be, I believe, of vital importance, and I think that for many people who will be listening to us, it will even change their lives and their way of thinking. Before that, I wanted to mention and wanted to refer to a book of yours that is coming out now in the fall, right? That you are writing it with Juan Carlos Cebrián. If you agree, because you know why I mentioned this at the beginning, because many people, when the interview ends, love it. They have loved the interview, or they have loved the words of the interviewee, and they always ask me, has he written any book? Can we find it? Etc., etc. So if you agree, I ask this to clarify for the viewers.
Well, yes, I became interested in the topics, especially with near-death experiences, because of the stories and experiences shared by the patients I have treated with a clinical death diagnosis, and by resuscitating them with cardiopulmonary resuscitation methods, I managed to recover some of them. And some of these patients, well, they mentioned near-death experiences to me. I have researched this topic a lot. I have contacted other experts to expand my knowledge, and in the end, well, my experience I have tried, and also due to the requests of many people who ask me, well, I have written a book which gathers all these experiences and the lives of my patients and my conclusions in the study of them, in which my good friend and journalist Juan Carlos Cebrián has collaborated, and which is soon already at the printer, Editorial Planeta, is going to publish it. I estimate that in the summer or after the summer, the book will be released for sale. That is, it will be available for purchase. The title of the book is The Supraconsciousness Exists. Is There Life After Life? This is the title of the book.
Great. Well, the viewers already know, so stay tuned. This will be published in March. Well, you'll have to wait a few months, but it will be worth it. So today, doctor, let's get to what brought you here and us to Barcelona, which is life after death. But first of all, I wanted to ask if we should be afraid of death.
Our current society, our civilization, is largely based on great materialism. And the identity of this materialistic society is what we define as ego. The ego is our identity, I repeat, materialistic. It has an external origin. Therefore, it is insecure, incomplete, changing. It depends a lot on the opinion of others, and its goals are success, fame, wealth, power, dominance. To achieve these objectives, the ego often adopts negative life dynamics in which excessive competitiveness, jealousy, envy, hatred, aggression, and violence can prevail. I like, when talking about violence, to remember the words of Gandhi, who said violence is the limit of incompetence. Well, since the ego is entirely based on matter, on the body, and we all know that death is a reality, it is the most democratic fact that exists. No one escapes it. At the moment the person dies, the body disappears, it transforms. Then the ego disappears. This is the reason why currently, as the ego prevails, and the ego knows that death means the end of its existence, people are afraid of death. Death is a taboo. Why are people afraid of death? People are afraid of death, firstly because the transition from life to death is often uncomfortable, painful, and very lonely. We have all had a relative or friend with esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, which is what I operate on and treat, and how the patient deteriorates, suffers until they reach the end in cachexia, just skin and bones, to the point that when they pass away, the family and friends say, now poor thing, they can rest. That is to say, the transition is frightening. In the second place, because it represents a step into the unknown. This is what most distresses the ego. We do not know what happens. People do not know. There is great ignorance about it. The third cause of the fear of death is because we leave everything behind. We leave family, friends, material possessions for which we have fought so much, even wasted our lives. We come with nothing and we leave with nothing. And lastly, we have an extremely powerful instinct for self-preservation that anchors us to life. These four factors condition us to see death in this civilization, where the great ego, egomania, prevails as a taboo, as something frightening, as something we fear. That's why people don't want to talk about it. It's a topic people prefer to set aside.
Ethan, how should we explain death? That is, someone who has just lost a family member. What should we say to them? How should we explain this to them?
To be able to interpret death, it is fundamental. It totally depends on the existential conception we have. If we base ourselves on the ego, no matter how much we explain death, the only thing we can tell a person, a friend, a family member, is that now the person who has died is resting, because with death everything ends.
That is to say, we will never see them again, and we will never know anything about this person again.
In contrast, this is not our existential reality. Our existential reality, and today we have real objective evidence with a scientific basis, allows us to demonstrate that after death, our existential reality continues, what is called non-local consciousness, superconsciousness, or also spirit. It can be defined in various ways. If our true identity, what makes us unique and exclusive, persists, it means that the body is a cover, a suit that we put on, that we adopt very temporarily, but our true identity persists. So, if we have this existential conception, it is very easy to talk to and help family and friends when they lose a loved one. Don't worry, they have completed their cycle in the human dimension, but their true essence endures in another dimension.
Yes, I would like to delve a little into what you mentioned about the superconsciousness. Develop it a bit more. What is this superconsciousness and how can we access it, if there is any way to do so?
Yes, with the idea or conception materialist of the Cartesian and Newtonian method that adopts or recognizes a materialist consciousness that we have defined as ego, our ego identity is a completely transient identity. That is to say, the anthropological conception of the human being from a materialistic point of view, the scientific method, and therefore, with the identity of the ego, can be defined as a body that is matter and a mind with all mental and emotional activities such as thoughts, memories, memory, consciousness. That is, all mental activities depend on our mind. But according to the scientific method, these activities are an epiphenomenon of matter. That is, they are a consequence of the metabolic biochemical activity of matter, of nerve cells. Therefore, from the materialist point of view, of the ego, of the scientific method, as Descartes, one of the founders of the scientific method, defined very well, I think, therefore I am. What does it mean? That according to the scientific method, death means ceasing to think due to the destruction and death of our cells, therefore ceasing to exist. With the scientific method, I repeat, death means the end of our existence, everything ends. But today we know that this is not true. And how do we know this? Well, I personally, through a series of phenomena that we define as transcendent, meaning there is a component that materialism of the scientific method cannot explain. And of all these phenomena, the one that has interested me is near-death experiences. What are near-death experiences? Near-death experiences. They are a series of events and experiences that patients whom we have diagnosed with clinical death for various reasons tell us about or manifest. That is, patients who are in cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, without reflexes and without mental activity. They have absolutely no activity. The electrocardiogram is flat and the electroencephalogram after 15 or 20 seconds is also flat, there is no activity. Well, if we manage to revive them with the cardiopulmonary resuscitation measures, cardiac massage, intracardiac injection with adrenaline to stimulate cardiac contractility, application of shocks with the AED, with the defibrillator, then there is a percentage of patients we manage to recover. I have revived quite a few of these patients. Then some of these patients have told me a series of experiences and events that really caught my attention. Always, and I want to emphasize this, coinciding with the time, from a temporal point of view, when the patient was clinically dead. That is, there was no cardiac activity nor mental activity. That is to say, during this time interval is when he developed these experiences and events. So, I studied these experiences and had a series of really surprises when studying them, and from here I could deduce that we are truly body, which is matter, we are mind with emotional activities, but we have our true identity, what makes us unique and exclusive. This is what I call supraconsciousness. It is a consciousness that is above the local or neuronal consciousness, the one we talked about before. And this consciousness endures. It can also be called, others call it non-local consciousness because it has continuity outside the brain, and others define it as spirit. We can give it whatever name we want. The important thing is that after physical death, a consciousness persists that is our true identity and has certain characteristics among them that it is eternal. That is, it has existed, exists, and will always exist. Therefore, there is no need to fear death because our existential reality endures and will endure eternally. What remains, what we lose, is the shell, the suit, the case that for a time acquires our true identity, the supra-consciousness, to develop. even what we call human life, which is three-dimensional, the period of our human life. But our true identity endures. Our super consciousness is
And delving a little deeper into near-death experiences, which I find fascinating. In fact, I have many questions about them, and I will ask them. I wanted to ask you about the patients. What are they like for them? How do the patients who have had a near-death experience describe these experiences? Pardon the redundancy.
Yes. First of all, these experiences, it's important. I have studied them deeply, and I have seen that they have a series of characteristics. They are very, very common. There are thousands and thousands of cases described in the global literature of patients who have had near-death experiences. Secondly, they have a logical structure. In the third place, these experiences repeat a series of items or phenomena in all patients. That is, the differences between near-death experiences from one patient to another are more about nuance than concept. In third place, patients remember these experiences their whole lives. The more time passes, the more present they are in their lives. And finally, they constitute a great emotional impact on the patient, especially regarding their existential conception, which changes profoundly, and this determines a change in their life dynamics, in their vital role. I have followed these patients over time to see how the severe pathology they had evolved, and also because I have been very interested in observing the psychological impact. Later, if you want, we can discuss what the psychological impact consists of, how it manifests in these patients. What do these patients report? These patients are afraid to tell us about their near experience, what we call NDE, near-death experiences. Why are they afraid? Because they see this as something strange that goes beyond normality, and they fear being told that it is either hallucinations or that they are emotionally unwell. Even in the global literature, there are patients who have been diagnosed as psychopaths for reporting their near-death experience and have received psychiatric treatment. That is to say, they are reluctant. You have to ask them, insist on it, and they report the following. First of all, the first thing they mention is the sensation of leaving the body, and from an elevated position, they see exactly what is happening in that environment. They are greatly surprised because the first thing they see is their body, which they identify among a group of medical staff who are working to resuscitate their body. He does not understand what is happening. Secondly, he tries to communicate. It is impossible to communicate in the state he is in with the usual means of communication in our human dimension, with medical staff who are treating or resuscitating his body. A patient, for example, came and tried to touch me, and her surprise was great because when she touched me, she passed through me. They easily pass through solid structures. So this patient, for example, passed through, and they tell you with all kinds of details what is happening in places that can be very distant, even on the other side of the world. There are described cases, patients being resuscitated in the United States recounted what was happening on the other side of the world in Australia. A patient of mine told me, while her body was clinically dead, and resuscitation maneuvers were being performed, she described everything that was happening in my emergency department, which has several areas. Then they mentioned that they contact some beings, they call them beings of light, who help them. They begin to increasingly notice a feeling of peace, harmony, and joy. It is also common for them to contact deceased loved ones. A patient of mine contacted her mother, which brought her great joy. And finally, everyone talks about a light. And upon contacting the light, the feeling of peace, harmony, and especially joy and love reaches levels never experienced in the human dimension. It is also common for them to report that, as if it were a screen, they can observe the most important events of their life. And finally, these beings of light, tell them that they have to return, that they have not finished their cycle in the human dimension. Most of them say they do not want to return because the situation is so pleasant and full of joy. In the other dimension where they find themselves at those moments, they do not want to. Others ask for it due to their responsibility. For example, mothers who have small children who have responsibilities want to return willingly, voluntarily, but the vast majority refuse. This, in a global way with small details, influences because logically the conceptual level or cultural level of the person, the religious education they have, the principles introduced. As you can imagine, I don't want to touch on religious aspects, but logically believers, well, here they introduce terminology related to their religious beliefs, but conceptually what they recount is theirs. All these items are very well described by Bruce Grayson, one of the people with great worldwide experience on near-death experiences.
Then I also understand that one of the characteristics of near-death experiences is that they are very vivid experiences, right? That they differ and are far removed from, for example, hallucinations, right? Even, there is a very famous doctor named Eben Alexander, in his case, who was a person, very reluctant to this type, practically materialistic, very dismissive of spiritual matters, and he had a near-death experience, and since then he is a staunch defender of this. He says that they are very vivid experiences, not at all foggy or misty or blurry, right? So I also wanted to ask you, normally the people who have had near-death experiences, it causes a transformation in them, which is very different from what happens with hallucinations, for example, right? Normally, for example, they lose the fear of death, the loss of loved ones becomes relative, they start to have more peaceful lives, they think about matters more like love, friendship, family, etc. Is this true?
Totally true, what has been said. First of all, they refer to the near-death experience. They define it, saying, "Doctor, this is not a dream, it is completely different from a dream. It is a brutal emotional impact that these patients have." So, as I have told you before, I have followed these patients and tried to, discover and understand what the psychological impact consists of. For them, it is very profound. First of all, they say they feel, as I mentioned at the beginning, very misunderstood. They cannot share their experiences with doctors, nurses, family, or friends because they are not understood. As you have rightly said, they are told that these are hallucinations or strange experiences that should not be given importance. Secondly, they completely lose their fear of death, absolutely. Patients have told me, truly they have told me the following: "Doctor, you harmed me by resuscitating me. You completely harmed me. I mean, I didn't want to come back and you revived me." Other patients have told me, they say, "The near-death experience has given me the knowledge of my true existential reality. Now I really know what life is. I know what life is in the three-dimensional human situation. And I know what my existential reality is, which is another dimension that endures my life." So I ask them, "For you, what is being born?" They say being born is the simplest thing in the world. It's like putting on a suit, a body that is like a suit, a cover, a case that one wears for a while. A case that is stardust, right? It is matter that was produced 13,780,000,000 years ago in the Big Bang. And that for a time lends us this stardust, which is energy, is matter, and to fulfill a function that covers our true identity, our superconsciousness, and when we have fulfilled our function in this three-dimensional situation, we return it to the universe, not a single atom is lost. So I ask them, "Is life interesting?" They say life is wonderful. They say, in the human dimension, we are not truly happy. We have moments of pleasure. But true happiness, which is this feeling of peace, of harmony that originates within us, is only achieved when one knows and experiences their supraconsciousness. The same as freedom, true free will. True freedom is when one is guided by their supraconsciousness, not by their ego. The ego is conditioned in this dynamic by a character with habits that have conditioned the character. And this character then determines the way of thinking and therefore our feelings, our mood. These habits have been instilled in us, and often it is not our true way of thinking. Therefore, true freedom is only through supraconsciousness. They become very intuitive. Intuition is knowing the truth without reasoning it. It comes out automatically. It is an expression of our supraconsciousness, which is omniscient, knows everything, and never deceives us. Another characteristic is that they lose interest in material things. They now value material things as a means to develop their life in the human dimension. But it is no longer a goal, not the purpose it was before, when ego and egomania prevailed. Another important aspect is that they become tremendously empathetic, altruistic, loving, kind, and fair. They are very struck by it, and what hurts them the most is when they remember that they saw their life as if it were a screen during the near-death experience. And what hurt them the most is when they saw that they had willfully committed some negative act that harmed the person, an animal, or the planet. That is to say, this is what really hurt them the most. Therefore, they become tremendously loving, empathetic, and kind. And finally, a great spirituality awakens in them. Religious affiliation loses interest. They are no longer lovers of dogmas, but have a need to project their authentic essence, which is their supraconsciousness, which is holistic in relation to universal consciousness, the primary consciousness, what we define as God, the Christians and Catholics. Our consciousness, this supraconsciousness of ours, is holistic with the primary consciousness. So this spirituality is the need of our supraconsciousness to return to its origin, to return to God. This is the true need for spirituality of these patients. All these conditions, as I have told you before, a profound and important change in their vital dynamics, their vital role. There is an American who knows who Bush is, very fond of statistics, who conducted a study on patients who had near-death experiences and who were married. 75% got divorced. Why? Because the mindset of the one who had the near-death experience, whether male or female, changed completely their vital dynamics, and the other, the partner, logically, you are no longer the person I knew. That is, it causes relationship problems, and this is why there was such a high incidence of divorces in marriages where one of the two partners had experienced an NDE.
Then also, before asking the question, you have mentioned many things, both the idea of God and philosophical issues, which I would like to delve into a bit later because they seem very interesting to me. But following a bit on this topic of near-death experiences, there are cases that are truly anomalous, right? For example, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross has documented that there are blind people who have had near-death experiences and have been able to transcribe or explain everything that was happening in the room at that moment.
You are absolutely right. There is even an American author who collected cases of patients who had a near-death experience and who, in their human dimension, in normal life before their near-death experience, had either a physical defect or were missing a leg or an arm, even some blind people, blind from birth, who had never seen an image. Then, to everyone's surprise, the patients, during the time they experienced their NDE, their near-death experience, the physical defect disappeared. They had, if they were missing a limb, a leg, they had the leg. If they were missing an arm, they had the arm. The blind, who had never seen a real object, even those who were blind from birth, saw calmly, and they were frankly impressed and surprised. They discovered what sight is. They saw for the first time in their lives. That is to say, you are right in commenting that in the near-death experience, all these physical defects that we may have in our human dimension completely disappear.
And then this is not exactly...
They are not exact, this that I would mention, they are not exactly things about near-death experiences, but it's the previous step, and I also find it interesting and worth mentioning that there have been documented cases of people with Alzheimer's and very advanced Alzheimer's in which they have regained lucidity before dying, and have even spoken and engaged in conversations with people who, moreover, have died years before or are not in that room.
This is also true. This is documented. So think that in Alzheimer's, it is a loss of memory due to the deposit of an abnormal protein, which is amyloid substance, in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, of the limbic system, of the midbrain, which by phylogeny is the brain of mammals. There is a vacuolization, a destruction of the hippocampus, and they lose memory. Well, at the moment of death, some patient, it's documented, some Alzheimer's patient has remembered and started to speak, has regained their memory. Why have they regained their memory? This can be interpreted as the moment when the superconsciousness is released. For this reason, do not fear the final transition, the final step from life to death, the transition when the supraconsciousness emerges, our true identity is revealed. You can then contact loved ones who have already passed away and come to help with the transition. Then they regain all faculties, they can fully recover. The supraconsciousness is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, eternal, knows everything and can do everything. Then, when it manifests, when the supraconsciousness emerges at the moment of transition, it can display all its abilities, including fully recovering memory. This is true.
Of course, because then here we will be stating that memory is included within consciousness, because here we open another topic, which I think is very interesting. I mentioned this before starting the recording, and of course, truly, from my understanding, from my point of view, the great scientific debate is whether the brain is the brain that generates consciousness, or if brain and consciousness are dissociated. So, of course, there are, people like, for example, the British doctor Penny Sartori, who has worked in the ICU, who has a work called Consciousness and Brain, and she talks about the brain channeling consciousness but not creating it. Van Lommel, who is a very renowned cardiologist, has left everything to dedicate himself to researching near-death experiences. And, by the way, in 1988, he published an article in The Lancet.
In 2001, in The Lancet.
I think that was the second one, if I remember correctly, the first in 1988 and the second in 2000.
He has those books. He also has those books.
And well, in fact, those who reviewed the article consider it impeccable, that it was a very good scientific article with the guarantees that it has. And well, he also talks about this brain consciousness dissociation and says that the body is a vessel. And well, during the course, from when we are born until we die, the consciousness develops, and when the body dies, the consciousness continues living. And he, if I remember correctly, says that this consciousness includes memory. So is this true? Would our memory belong to our consciousness? Do you think so?
You have touched on many topics. It can attack everyone.
Yes, look, first of all, we must differentiate three concepts, which are consciousness, soul, and spirit. They are three different things. Although sometimes authors may change the terminology, but there are three different things. It is undeniable that we have a neuronal or local consciousness of cerebral origin, which is due to the metabolic activity of neurons, to the biochemistry of neurons. Proof of this is that when we inhibit neuronal activity, as in sleep, with anesthesia, our consciousness disappears. This, from the materialistic point of view of the scientific method, has no explanation, because I will clearly demonstrate it. From a scientific point of view, neuronal metabolic activity is the reaction of some molecules reacting with each other. Molecules are particles, they are matter. There is no explanation with the scientific method for how the reaction of matter with matter results in a mental activity that has no material substrate. This cannot be explained with the scientific method. This can be explained with the theoretical physics. With quantum mechanics, yes. which shows us that the origin, the basic structure of the universe is not matter, but energy. Everything is energy. In this sense, yes. That is, we have a local or neuronal memory. Apart from this, we have our superconsciousness, which we have said is omnipresent, eternal, omniscient, knows everything, and omnipotent, can do everything. Therefore, in death, it is this. Death means detaching from the body. So this local consciousness will cease to exist because the neurons die and are destroyed. But our supraconsciousness, which knows everything, is eternal. It endures eternally.
So, what is the difference between consciousness, soul, and spirit? Consciousness refers to local or neuronal consciousness.
It is what we have said is produced by the activity of neurons. At the other extreme is the spirit, which corresponds to the supraconsciousness, which is our true identity, the manifestation or expression of universal consciousness in each of us.
Christians, Jesus said it, you are made in the image and likeness of Abba. Abba is the primary consciousness.
In Eastern philosophies, it is said it is the finite expression of the infinite, the universal consciousness that we Christians define as God, manifests in each of us. It is the supra-consciousnness, it is eternal, it is our true identity. They are both. And in the middle is the soul. What is the soul? The soul is Freud's subconscious. It is where our history is, where our entire life is. And this is what we carry with us, what in Eastern philosophies they would call karma, the law of cause and effect. Each person in the revolution has a path and has consequences, a karma, and this is what we carry with us. So, the question, which is very good that you asked before, if we have the supra-consciousness, which is our true identity, and during our human life we have a local or neuronal consciousness, how do they relate? If our true identity is the supraconsciousness, but in the human dimension, the local consciousness is manifested. Roger Penrose described this very well. Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize in 2020 for his work on black holes, mathematician and cosmologist from the University of Oxford. And also in a synchronous way, with synchrony, it was written by Stuart Hameroff, who is a psychologist and anesthesiologist from Arizona at the University of Arizona. He wrote it through the microtubules. In reality, what they demonstrated is that our brain acts as an interface, like a television set. Who really provides our true identity, our true soul activity, is the superconsciousness. What our brain does is like a television. The television receives electromagnetic waves that provide it with information, and the television transforms this information. It receives into image and sound. Our brain does the same. The fundamental information comes from the supraconsciousness, and our local or neuronal consciousness transforms it into images, sounds, thoughts, into whatever we want. How do these two consciousnesses relate? What I said before, Roger Penrose and Hameroff talked about microtubules. Microtubules are part of the cytoskeleton of eukaryotic cells, that is, cells that have a nuclear membrane. It is a structure formed by a protein that is alpha and beta tubulin, which has a hollow helical structure. There is water inside, aqueous content. And it is precisely in this area where there is a quantum transfer of information between the supraconsciousness and the local or neuronal consciousness. They attributed, those who were against this theory, that for quantum transfer to occur, it had to happen at absolute zero temperature, minus 273 degrees Celsius, and at this temperature, human life is unviable. So they tried to prove it. Until now, this is scientifically proven. Today we know, after there was a wonderful work done at the University of Berkeley in California, and published in Science in 2007 that demonstrated that photosynthesis, you already know that photosynthesis is a fundamental phenomenon in the life of our planet. It is the transformation of inorganic matter into organic matter by a protein called chlorophyll, which is done by cells called chloroplasts found in bacteria and especially in plants. It is what gives the green color to the leaves of plants. Well, this chlorophyll absorbs solar energy. The CO2 from the atmosphere interacts with water and is what allows the transformation from inorganic to organic. The capture of energy by chlorophyll is now proven to be due to a quantum effect. This is why we now talk about quantum biology. That is, it has been clearly demonstrated that quantum phenomena can occur at ambient temperatures in our lives. Today, one must be very careful because it is still in its early stages, but quantum biology is beginning to have some foundations that justify it. And there are 4 principles of quantum mechanics that justify quantum biology, which are quantum coherence, superposition of states, the tunneling phenomenon, and then quantum entanglement. These 4 phenomena explain that the basic principles of quantum mechanics can act and allow quantum biology. I repeat that one must still be very careful, but they explain the phenomenon of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff.
In fact, I really like that you mentioned Penrose, because when José Carlos González Hurtado came here to talk about the existence of God, he quoted him on numerous occasions, and in fact his book, well, he has a book talking, right, with scientific evidence of the existence of God. And he also quotes Penrose, and all these things you were mentioning were familiar to me because he also mentioned them. One thing I wanted to comment on as well. Well, you talked about karma, and I'll ask you a little more about that later, but I would like to ask you about duality, at least from the point of view, or from the conceptual point of view of Christians about heaven and hell. Kenneth Ring documents or details 3 types of near-death experiences. The first are reverse experiences, in which, well, let's say that the person who has them sees the same as others, but it scares them, right? And then it's like, it's a bit reluctant. Then the second would be the total void, right? Which is like an experience of helplessness, of non-existence, of emptiness, right? And then there is a third one, which is the infernal ones. In this one, it is detailed that the patients have terrifying visions, a sense of threat, of torment. Well, there was a fourth one, I think. Well, this one is not so categorized, which is like a kind of sensation of judgment, of final judgment, right? In fact, about 10 years ago, there was the famous case of Gloria Lago, who was, a girl who had, if I remember correctly, from Latin America, but well, it was basically it's a case of a girl who had one of these experiences, a negative experience, so to speak. And well, it says that apparently she was Catholic, invoked God, and so to speak, kind of got out of the bad moment. There is a scientist, Hubert Knoblauch, he is German, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, who reports that around 4%, it's somewhat complex and not so well studied, but well, it's an approximation, that 4% of near-death experiences are negative, like the ones I mentioned. Is this true? Are there near-death experiences that, could tell us that there is a hell, a final judgment?
What you are saying is true. Not all near-death experiences are pleasant. The patient really discovers a situation of well-being, of joy, of peace, and above all, insists a lot on love, insists a lot. Not all are like this, but there is a percentage that are called terrifying or demonic. I have not had any of my patients report this type of near-death experiences. They exist. As for the very little experience, because the cases are few, evidently it is below 10%. From 5 to 7% it depends. And I repeat that I have no experience with them. These patients, the problem with these major patients, those who have have experienced a case is after the near-death experience. They have some impressive psychological and psychiatric problems because of what they went through and need very deep, intense psychiatric support because they have a really hard time. Exactly why they have it is not known. What does seem to be the case is that there is a certain relationship. It seems, I repeat, that I have no experience in this, it's what I've read, okay? That there is a certain relationship. They are patients who have led a very tumultuous life. So these people tell us, those who returned and have this experience make us think that those who act badly must have a very bad time. And the one who acts well will be well. It's what we would call heaven or hell. I want to state from the beginning that I base myself entirely on the scientific method, on conventional classical medicine. I am neither a medium nor a seer, nor do I have experience in energetic medicines, nor do I have experience in complementary treatments. I base myself entirely. Therefore, what happens afterward, I am not an expert in this. I can, explain what my patients who recover tell me, and then I have investigated how we can justify them, and there are some scientific basis. What is written, for example, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, these people are very evolved. They are people who voluntarily can not only pass during death or in a near-death experience, but voluntarily, consciously, they can reach contact with the superconsciousness. These highly evolved people transcend, they unfold, and these people have written the Tibetan Book of the Dead and speak of 16 levels. That is to say, according to the degree of evolution of the karma that the person conditions, they say, during their life in the human dimension, they go to a karma more or less distant from divinity, and therefore from well-being, enjoyment, and love. This is what they say. I repeat that I have no experience in this, but it does seem that there is a connection from what they say, that there can be terrifying and demonic experiences in people who seem to lead a life, and that in people with this ability to see the beyond, which I absolutely do not have, they refer in their studies in the Tibetan Book of the Dead to these levels that may have a correlation with what we call heaven and hell.
Okay. And a question about the cause of near-death experiences. Do you think that the taking medication or the intake of medication could be the cause of these vivid experiences?
Look, logically, those of these, the staunch defenders of the scientific materialist method, who only base themselves on a materialist ontology, these people do not accept near-death experiences. They say they are hallucinations. And when we mention near-death experiences to them, they tell us they are caused by various factors. All our hypotheses, not one has been proven with the scientific method as they claim. And the causes are the following. According to the scientific method, they refer to or condition as causes, hypothesis A, not proven, the following. First, a regression to REM sleep, to deep sleep. In the second place, they also mention the administration of medications. This is not true because my patients, I mean it seriously, the medications they have received have been adrenaline injection, 1 molar bicarbonate to compensate for metabolic acidosis, some corticosteroids, that is medications that do not cause these things at all.
Okay.
In third place, they mention the release alteration of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are amino acids or neuropeptides involved in the transmission of the nerve-to-nerve impulse from one neuron to another, which we call the neuronal synapse. They say there is an increase in glutamate. Glutamate is a major excitant of neuronal activity and can cause hallucinations similar to those caused by ketamine, which is an anesthetic. Others say it is a decrease in GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, another neurotransmitter that inhibits neurons, and in the absence of inhibition, the neurons are excited. Others say it is due to an N-dimethyltryptamine, similar to serotonin, which is 5-hydroxytryptamine, released by the pineal gland, which is also hallucinogenic. That is to say, there are several. Others say it is an excess of opioid neurotransmitters, enkephalins, endorphins due to the state of well-being. All these are hypotheses not at all proven.
That is to say, we do not know the exact cause.
Okay.
There are hypotheses, but we don't know it.
In fact, Susan Blackmore herself, who is also a detractor, quite a detractor of these types of experiences, she claims or claimed, because it seems that lately she does not support her ideas with such clarity and forcefulness, that the cause of these experiences was anoxia. In fact, the lack of oxygen, right? But in the brain. But that has a hypothesis called the dying brain hypothesis.
Yes.
She says that it's because of anoxia. I wanted to ask what you think about this, because there are doctors like cardiologists. I mentioned it before, right? Like they said a case of Van Lommel, who says that he refutes it with the simple argument that if the cause were anoxia, which is the lack of oxygen in the brain, all patients who are about to die would suffer from anoxia because they have a lack of brain in the oxygen.
I agree with you. For example, in the statistics, the one by Pim van Lommel, of 344 cases, one of the most extensive, there are statistics from the United States and England and so on, there are significant ones. The statistics, that is clinical deaths, compared to cardiorespiratory ones that produce near-death experiences, are between 15 and 20%. That is, not everyone has it. Why do some have it and others do not? We do not know. When a cardiorespiratory arrest occurs, the brain is extremely sensitive to the lack of oxygen. It is not hypoxia, it is anoxia, a total lack of oxygen. There is a lack of glucose, which is the energy source. The brain weighs 1.5 kilograms and consumes 20% of all the energy our body generates. And on the contrary to what happens with the muscle, which has a glucose reserve in the form of glycogen, the brain has no reserve. Continuously, the blood supplies it with glucose. It supplies it continuously. When the blood does not circulate due to cardiac arrest, it is left without an energy source. A hypercapnia occurs. The carbon dioxide increases because the blood does not carry it away. A metabolic acidosis occurs due to the accumulation of metabolites that the blood does not carry away and due to the accumulation of carbon dioxide. That is to say, a series of alterations occur in cardiac arrest that we cannot specify, which is the lack of oxygen. And as Pim van Bommel rightly says, there are many cases of anoxic situations that are not accompanied by near-death experiences. If it were specifically due to anoxia, everyone would have them, and they do not. That is to say, there are many metabolic alterations, and none of them have been absolutely proven to be the principal cause of the experiences. Today we do not know why they occur and why some patients have them and others do not. Yes, we do not know.
And why do you think that the materialist scientists, not only scientists, doctors, physicists in general, the whole range of scientists do not talk about this or talk about this in a low voice? Because there are many detractors. I was telling Susan Blackmore, but there's the case, for example, of Carl Sagan, who maintained, this hypothesis that the tunnel seen before dying was a memory of birth, which, I don't think it even needs to be commented on or mentioned because it falls apart on its own, right? Because there are people born by cesarean section, others who are born the other way around, right? In short, there is also the case of Dennis Coble, who, is quite a naturalistic scientist and practically a denialist, more than a skeptic. So I wanted to ask if, in some cases, science, instead of being skeptical, is denialist.
She is not skeptical, no. She is very denialist at times. I have had great problems when talking, for example, with materialist scientists. I was telling you earlier, with Western philosophers and Christian theologians, why science? Because science, the scientific method, is entirely based on the real, on the objective, objectivity, a term already introduced by Aristotle, in what is measurable, in what we can see and touch, which establishes a dualism, a separation between observer and object. There is a locality there is a cause-effect relationship. That is, all these factors are fundamental to the scientific method. And these factors disappear the moment we enter the plane of the transcendent. Because think that not only are there are transcendent phenomena like near-death experiences. You have telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, mystical experiences, psychokinesis, experiences of the dying, near-death experiences. So there are many transcendent phenomena. These phenomena have neither duality, nor materialism, nor locality, nor objectivity. So all this goes against all the principles. Thus, the materialist is trapped in a closet where each wall is one of these objects that limits their vision beyond the closet. You have to come out of the closet and look. And what allows us to come out of the closet and understand this? Theoretical physics, quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, introduced in 1900 by Max Planck, is fundamentally, as is logical, based on theoretical physics.
By the way, Planck was a believer.
Huh?
That he was a believer.
He was a believer. We will talk about this later, which is very curious. It is theoretical physics that tells us that the structural conception of the universe preached by the scientific method changes drastically. It is not matter, it is all energy, it is all electromagnetic waves of variable frequency and amplitude. And with energy, we can indeed explain this separation, this absolute abyss that the scientific method establishes between science and metaphysics spirituality, between matter and spirit. This is not true. Quantum mechanics shows us as a parallel. Quantum mechanics shows us that energy can manifest as a particle, as matter, and as a wave, as energy. So, this which the scientific method does not understand, which is matter, spirit, has its analogy in quantum mechanics in wave particle. So, the proof is with you that even the great theoretical physicists we have talked about, you referred to Max Planck, there is a great philosopher who is Ken Wilber, who has conducted a study on the existential and cosmic conception of the fathers of quantum physics.
I am talking about Max Planck, Pauli, Einstein, Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, Eddington, James.
Well, Heisenberg was Jewish.
Yes, he was Jewish. And then the conclusion, he says, do you know what it is?
Which one is it?
They are great mystics. They pursue the same thing that religion pursues. They pursue, seek, and demonstrate that there is a primary energy, a universal quantum consciousness. There is something first, and this something first manifests in each of us. They seek what they call the law that encompasses, that unites all four forces of the universe. They are searching for this and recognize that they seek the same thing as religion. In other words, they are great mystics. This is the great problem of the scientific method, which is confined to absolute materialism. Another compelling proof you have is that the great materialists, you have spoken of Eben Alexander. Eben Alexander, a great neurosurgeon trained at Harvard, who operated on the brain, who had great knowledge of the brain, and when told about the experiences, he would say, this is nonsense, these are hallucinations. This man one night wakes up with a headache, which he falls into a coma. They take him to his hospital, they perform a spinal tap. It turns out to be a culture, a meningoencephalitis caused by a gram-negative and E. coli. It's very serious, everyone dies. This man recovered after 6 days and had several near-death experiences and wrote a beautiful book, which is proof of heaven. This man, who is a great scientist, who criticized near-death experiences and had one or several himself, is now the great defender, as you have rightly said, on a scientific and global level, that the near-death experience is real. When one has it, they realize that this is different. We have to accept it. And quantum mechanics allows us to avoid this great abyss that the scientific method has established between science and metaphysics and religion, between matter and spirit, which are all the same. One refers to the macroscopic world, and the other refers to the microscopic world, to the study of subatomic particles. But everything is the same. Everything is interconnected, interrelated.
And a question. Well, you have talked about many very interesting things, but you were mentioning the idea of God or the first consciousness. Some call it God, others. There are many names, right? If this God or this intelligent designer, could we call it that? Yes, yes.
Is it the primary consciousness? Is it what preceded or what precedes, and the time and space?
Totally.
Has this intelligent designer, this God, had to be created by something?
Not at all.
This God, this universal consciousness, this intelligent designer, as you have said very well, is outside of creation, outside of creation. He has manifested in creation with Jesus Christ, with the avatars, Muhammad, Jesus Christ. All these avatars are the manifestations of God in the human dimension. But he, the primary consciousness, is outside of creation. In him there is neither space nor time. And he is the only one capable of creating. And he created the universe. And today we have evidence that the universe was created. As I mentioned before, I recommend a book that is a bestseller, which is very interesting, by Michel-Yves Bolliret. It is a current book titled God, Science and Causes, where it is scientifically demonstrated that the universe has a beginning and the universe has an end. And there are other causes that justify the existence of an intelligent designer. As Einstein already said, Einstein was asked, "Do you believe in God?" And Einstein replied, he said, "I believe in a perfect universe, because naturally, according to the second law of thermodynamics, everything tends toward disorder, what we call entropy. However, the universe is perfect, and when it is perfect, it is because it follows certain laws. And if it follows laws, an intelligence above has set them. That is to say, there is a primary intelligence. There are many proofs that allow us to demonstrate that the universe has a beginning and an end. The materialists cannot accept an origin of the universe, because if they accept that there is an origin, it means that someone has created it, because before there was nothing. Parmenides already said it, from absolute nothing, nothing can be created. So the only one who can create is an intelligent consciousness that has always existed. This one can indeed originate. And today we know that 13,780,000,000 years ago, there was the Big Bang when it originated. There is a very simple proof, which I am going to remind you of. Higgs, a great American cosmologist, in the 1950s, had a more powerful microscope of the universe on Mount of Wilms in California, and studied the galaxies and was able to verify that the galaxies are, the universe is expanding, they are moving apart. And he saw that the farther away the galaxy was, the greater the speed of separation. When he had studied and calculated this mathematically, do you know what he did? He went backwards. And do you know what surprise he had? That everything matched. Where?
At one point?
What is this point? The Big Bang, Einstein's theory of relativity, which relates energy with mass and time, is only possible and acceptable if we accept an origin, the thermal death, which is how the universe will end. What is the black hole? It is the collapse of a star that has consumed all its internal radioactivity, which evolves into a red one, a red giant, a white dwarf, and can become a neutron star or a black hole. There is an end. And everything that has a beginning and an end means that someone has made it. So, materialists cannot accept an origin, because if there is an origin, someone made it. They say the universe is eternal. It is not eternal. The universe is clear, just like life. Life originated 3.5 billion years ago. There is also clear evidence with fossils, etc., that a higher intelligence, called downward causation, intervened in the formation of life.
Well, in fact, if I may,
add something, you were criticizing, right? This materialist scientist, because of course, if there is a Big Bang, if there is an origin, if there is a beginning, there must be a beginner, right? In the Soviet Union, at that time it was already beginning to be considered, because before there was a conception of the universe in a steady state. The universe had no beginning and also had no end. There are already some streams that are beginning to consider teleology, right? The doctrine of final causes. They are already beginning to it begins to be thought that the universe may end, but that there was no beginning, right? And already when one of those who theorizes about the Big Bang is Father Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian priest. That moment was a turning point in science, because of course it sparked a kind of debate between those who believed in the beginning and those who did not. In fact, the Big Bang is a derogatory nickname to make fun.
Paul Ree, the one who introduced it in a derogatory manner.
Indeed. And the reason I mentioned all this is that there were many scientists during the Soviet Union who confirmed or stated with objective data, with scientific data, that the universe had a beginning. What happens? Since this was in a way affirming that there was a beginner, what did the Soviet Union do? What did the high officials do? They ordered the assassination of great scientists who in a certain way corroborated the Big Bang. So it's interesting. I wanted to mention some other information I have. I had also talked before about the experiences of the dying, which don't always have to be near-death experiences.
No.
But these are facts that, sometimes are shocking and are things that are complicated to explain. Dr. John Lerma, who is the director, allow me to read it because, his title is long. He is the medical director of inpatient care at the palliative care unit of the medical center in Houston. It reports that between 70 and 80% of people wait for their loved ones to leave the room before dying. How could we?
I have experience in this. These are called experiences of the dying. In my service, we have treated at a referral hospital, Bellvitge University Hospital, and we receive patients from all over the country. Patients with conditions that compromise vital situations, a lot of esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, stomach cancer, very complex conditions for transplants, etc. Therefore, we cannot always cure. I have seen many people die and I have experience with this. What are these experiences? I will give you an example. I remember, for instance, a case of a patient with esophageal cancer, an elderly person with metastasis, where it was no longer possible to adopt therapeutic approaches in these terminal cases. I like to talk with the family to facilitate the transition, to remove the anguish, the anxiety that comes with the final moments, sedate them with an IV drip. So you sedate them, you remove the tense, distressing situation, and so on. It's helping them with the transition. So a patient, I remember in this situation during rounds, I spoke with the family. I said, we can do this poor thing. He's already in a terminal situation. We are going to sedate him. The family agreed. We started to sedate the patient. And then the next day when I arrived, I saw the family in front of my office wanting to talk to me. They thanked me for all the treatment, the support that had been given to their father who had passed away. As I had told them, it was a terminal situation. Well, during the night, they said, but something happened that we don't understand. I already had experience, I imagined it. He says, what happened? He says, he was very sedated they put the IV, calm and all. He says, suddenly he woke up and started talking towards the foot of the bed. He says he started talking to our mother, his wife, who had died years ago. And he started talking about this and that. And in the end, when he finished talking, he turns and says, didn't you see that your mother was here at the foot of the bed? And they were terrified. They didn't see anything. And after this, the patient returned to a calm state, and shortly after, he passed away. He says, what happened? This is common. This is common. That is, in the final moments of transition, then family members or close people connected with whom we are emotionally very close can help with the transition and can manifest in an ethereal form that they see them or talk to them to help with the transition. The end is always one of joy, peace, and harmony when the superconsciousness emerges. That is to say, it is a frequent phenomenon, and intensivists and those in palliative medicine have experience with this. Look at what you have read.
That is to say, it is a certain fact that once again shows us that we cannot adopt this materialistic attitude at all costs, but there are transcendent phenomena, as we have said, telepathy, clairvoyance, these experiences of the dying near-death experiences, which justify that matter is not a structural element, that everything is energy, and that energy can manifest in a way in the form of waves. And energy, which is electromagnetic waves, is always information. Energy is information. So this consciousness that endures can manifest in many ways, and after physical death, it endures eternally. It is another proof of this reality of our existence, which is pure energy.
I understand then that when the universe comes to its end, to which it is destined, if our consciousness will continue to survive.
Eternally, because our consciousness is holistic with respect to the primary consciousness. The term holistic is important. Holistic is a term derived from the mathematical concept of fractal. Fractal was introduced by an Austrian mathematician Mandelbrot, who went to the United States and worked at Yale University. Fractal derives from the word fractions. A fractal is a whole, a total hologram formed by multiple parts, and each of the parts has the shape and properties of the whole.
Our consciousness?
It is a very good analogy to compare our consciousness. It is holistic, that is, it is part of this fractal. Our consciousness is God and has its properties. It is omnipresent, eternal, omniscient, knows everything, intuition never deceives us, and is omnipotent. That is, our consciousness has existed, exists, and will always exist because it is holistic, part of the primary consciousness. The only thing is that when we talk about thermal end, in the end, the thermal death of the universe, logically, we refer to what is matter, mass matter, which is low-frequency energy that manifests in the form of a matter particle. But we are in a completely different dimension, and we will endure eternally.
And based a little on the experiences that people have had in this dimension, is it known a little what the limitations are? Let me explain. For example, there are cases, right, where you can go through walls, or when you go to touch someone, you go through them. What are the limits? I understand that you can pick up objects from that dimension, and you can interact with things from that dimension.
We cannot act because our body, which is the cover, the suit that our superconsciousness has put on, and we act in a way. We are three-dimensional. It is very low-frequency energy. It is coarse. It is pure matter, but it is low-frequency energy. The proof is there, and this is what you refer to, the possibility of passing through. Our supraconsciousness, when it leaves, what patients say that a car tent passed through me, through the walls, because this is perfectly explained by quantum mechanics. Although we touch matter as something solid, it is actually empty. Everything is made up of atoms, and atoms are formed by a nucleus with a positive charge, the neutron, the protons and neutrons without charge, and around them the electrons with a negative charge. If you take an atom, you will see that the atom has a nucleus. Where are the electrons? They are at enormous distances. There are huge spaces between the subatomic particles. These spaces easily allow high-frequency electromagnetic waves to pass through. That's why these patients tell us that they can easily pass through me, through a wall, and they go through it completely. This is what is called, from a quantum point of view, the tunnel phenomenon. It's as if there were a tunnel that allows passage. While we are in a three-dimensional situation, logically, it is coarse matter. At the moment we shed our material envelope and become our existential reality, which is the superconsciousness, which is high-frequency energy, then it behaves as such. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, the tunnel phenomenon, the phenomenon of quantum coherence, the superposition of this, that is to say, then they can do everything that they already... I ask them, how is it that you can move? Do you know what they tell me? Well, it's quantum entanglement. The phenomenon is the same. They explain, saying, I think I'm in Australia and I'm already there. There is a transfer of information independent of time and space. They can move wherever they want, if they want to go to another planet. I am on Mars now, and it is on Mars. That is, it has the ability to transfer through the entanglement of energy independent of time and space.
I wanted to ask you, Doctor, about the idea of reincarnation, which is a taboo subject, a mysterious topic. So, without further delay, what is reincarnation?
Look, reincarnation is a controversial topic.
But if we look at the history of humanity, we will see that the Egyptians accepted it.
All Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, are based on reincarnation for them. The samadhi, which is the cycle of reincarnations, that is for them, it is fundamental. And in Christianity, the fathers of Christianity, the early Christians, perfectly accepted reincarnation.
It was from Justinian in the year 500.
Emperor of the Roman Empire, or Eastern Roman, who they decided, well, as a dogma, not to accept reincarnation. There are several aspects. Firstly, from a philosophical point of view, if our life is a path, this is very well expressed by Teilhard de Chardin, who is a Jesuit that, due to his evolutionary theories of life, was almost exiled. They wanted to excommunicate him, they exiled him and did not allow him to publish his works.
However, today the Pope Francis quotes him.
This Jesuit said that our life is a path that starts at the alpha point, where we are full of impurities, and on this path we eliminate the impurities until we reach the omega point, which is, let's say, the point without impurities, what we would call holiness in Christianity, Buddhahood, or enlightenment in Eastern philosophies. This is the end of our existence in the human dimension, gradually eliminating impurities until reaching a point. So, is this enough in one lifetime? Man, we are seeing that people who have a really stormy life, who commit crimes and all this, who pass away, and we see people who are saints, who are already very evolved. Is this fair? That is to say, this person must have the same recognition, the same treatment after death. If we accept that there is a superconsciousness that persists, and this person carries a karma, which is what we call, what philosophy calls, well, murky, let's call it murky, very murky. What happens to this person if they do not reincarnate? In contrast, the other saint is a person who has lived a life gradually eliminating their impurities. Would it be fair? If God is tremendously, is love, is justice, is goodness, does a child born in the center of Africa who has nothing have the same opportunities as we do, who have so many things to evolve well? Is all this fair?
This from the philosophical point of view. From the, let's say, more scientific point of view.
Today, with hypnosis, it is possible to get to know, for people who have experience in deep, intense hypnosis, to get to know, recognize and remember the past lives. And then there are cases in world biography, those of Brian Weiss, those of Jan Stevenson, which describe thousands of cases, especially in children who are not yet very shaped by the ego. There are cases of children, for example, from Jan Stevenson, children who want to go to a country they have never been to, and they go there and start saying there was a bakery here, there was this, there was that, very old, and the city council bought it, and it's true. And cases as surprising as this child who had never spoken this language starts speaking this language. That is to say, there are cases that explain things that have happened, which have been proven. That is certified data from a philosophical point of view, and from a certification point of view, yes, that we must accept. The Catholic Church, they speak of resurrection at the end of times. It's different, but from this point of view, let's say, a bit impartial, objective and scientific, it's certified, hypnosis achieves it, and from the philosophical and moral point of view, well, I believe there are people, I repeat that I have no experience in this, but there are very advanced mediums such as Allan Kardec. He is one of the great mediums that have existed. These people speak very clearly, that they get in touch with spirits and speak very clearly about reincarnations. I have no experience in this, but I repeat, I believe because of this philosophical aspect, because of what is certified, because of the work done by people, doctors, psychiatrists, who use hypnosis with therapeutic measures, there is evidence that makes me think reincarnation must exist.
And understand then that under this assumption where all souls would reincarnate, see, of course it would come to put it in a very, very grotesque way, right? A hyperbole. I understand that Hitler's soul would reincarnate, and it is possible that it is living or coexisting with us in this. It could perfectly exist in an equally tremendously dramatic situation of suffering, of pain, we don't know,
But it is perfectly feasible that his spirit, his superconsciousness, reincarnates. We do not know when, how, or where, but it is perfectly justifiable that it reincarnates in a different situation, and for its evolution. Okay?
And reincarnation, I understand that we are human beings who reincarnate into human beings, or there could be a reincarnation of people into other living beings.
Look, in 2014 in Cambridge, an important meeting was held in which, for example, Stephen Hopkins participated. Have you heard of Stephen Hopkins? They concluded that every living being has consciousness. Every living being, okay? What changes is the degree of consciousness. A plant has consciousness. You have seen it, it reacts to the sun. For example, it can turn, seek, that is, it responds to external stimuli. Music influences plants, it is proven. A dog, if you have a pet, has three aspects of consciousness, a consciousness of three levels. It has emotions. When it sees you, it gets happy when it sees its owner. It has the ability to learn and has memory. You can teach it things, and it remembers. And we have the highest level of consciousness. We have consciousness and self-awareness. Self-awareness is like a mirror that allows us to see if our decisions and actions are ethical or not. That is to say, there are different degrees. In other words, a person who needs a certain evolution can reincarnate in a situation of lower consciousness. And I don't know, because in this I have already told you that I am not, but experts in this, like Allan Kardec, certify it. And I repeat that I am not an authority to say this, because I don't have, as I have already told you, I am neither a seer, nor a medium, nor do I have experience in these things.
And something he does have experience in is medicine.
Yes.
Because as we mentioned at the beginning, he is a highly reputed doctor. I wanted to ask him, what is the cause of diseases, or what is the cause of the diseases of the 21st century?
Look, the cause of diseases currently, and a surgeon is speaking to you, the surgeon fundamentally operates. I operate with a scientific method, with conventional medicine entirely. It is what I teach my medical students and the residents who are in my service for 5 years, to train them in general digestive surgery.
The fundamental cause is the mind.
And the fundamental cause of our current society is the ego and the stress that the ego conditions with the vital dynamics that this ego determines. And today we know how stress acts. The persistent stress in which the human being lives conditions a stimulus of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus acts on the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland, through ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, acts on the adrenal glands. We start releasing cortisol and catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline. These are necessary for the neuroendocrine response to aggression, but it involves a tremendous energy consumption for the body. Then, once they have done their function, they disappear. But the person who is under continuous stress is continuously releasing cortisol and catecholamines.
And the persistence of cortisol and catecholamines causes heart disorders, rhythm disorders, blood pressure disorders, hypertension, cholesterol metabolism disorders, digestive disorders. At the brain level, they cause insomnia, anxiety, memory loss, difficulty in learning, difficulty in memory, and in the ability to manage emotions, and a very significant depression of our immune system, both cellular and humoral. It is proven that 1 minute of intense stress causes a drop in the immune system that lasts 6 hours, which predisposes the stressed person to suffer from infections, autoimmune diseases, and cancer. Notice that I have told you the causes that condition the most frequent diseases that determine mortality in our civilization: arteriosclerotic disease, heart attacks, strokes, and cancer. All of this is related to the immune system decline and the action of cortisol and catecholamines on our body. Therefore, today we can say that more than 90% of diseases, one of the factors, there are multifactorial diseases involving several factors, but one of the very important triggering factors is the ego and the stress that this ego conditions in our life dynamics.
Very enlightening. I'm sure for many more people as well. I think that being so interconnected, we live in an increasingly fast-paced, dynamic, and rapid society. We want everything now, exactly, and I think this is one of the causes. It's no coincidence. In fact, I was telling you before of the podcast, but I am now creating a mental health platform because we live in a time where young people and not so young adults too have more depression, more anxiety, and are less happy despite having all their basic needs met, right?
May I make a parenthesis? At the medical college, as I have already told you, as president of the senior medical section, a study on mortality in Catalonia has been conducted. It has been observed that the life expectancy is good, 85 years on average for women and 83 for men. And the causes of death have been examined. The most frequent, as I have already mentioned, are arteriosclerosis, myocardial infarctions, cerebrovascular accidents, and then cancer. But we had a sad situation when we found that the most important cause of mortality between 15 and 35 years was suicide. Notice that I am telling you suicide. And this is a consequence of the life dynamics that we are adopting in our civilization. These rushes, this stress, this continuous exalted ego, this competitiveness, this accelerated situation that leads to a lack of values, a lack of enthusiasm. I have said that life, once one connects with the superconsciousness, is considered something wonderful. You can be happy, you can be free. On the other hand, these people with the ego, without knowing materialists, have no values, and the main cause is suicide. This is very sad, isn't it?
And then based on this, how do you think one should face life?
One must face life by eliminating the ignorance that exists in our society, as there are many vested interests and many elements in our society that are interested in having an uneducated, unhealthy, and poor society. That way, it is easily controlled. When society loses ignorance and then knows its true essence, one realizes that life is wonderful, that there are extraordinary values. Life is wonderful. Anyway, think as Thales of Miletus said, one of the pre-Socratic sages. He said, the most difficult thing for a human being is to know oneself.
And the easiest thing is to speak ill of others.
This is what happens in our society. This fast-paced ego cannot waste time getting to know itself, seeking its inner self. It always has to go outward, to the material, to acquire material goods, struggle, competition, wealth, power, dominance. When their wealth has everything inside, yeshiyash, in their superconsciousness. That is where values and the meaning of life are. And since it is completely 180 degrees opposite to existential reality, there is a lack of values. And we see that the youth self provoke autolysis, commit suicide.
Well, in fact, this is a topic, well, as I have already mentioned, that, well, I think from now on, at the end of each interview, we are going to dedicate some time, as we are doing now, to talk about mental health, because it is a very, very important topic. It is of vital importance. You yourself have mentioned it, the relationship between stress and death. So I think it's, well, very interesting, and thank you very much for having mentioned these things that I believe will interest both young people and those not so young. We are approaching the end of the interview, but is there any other question I wanted to ask you? And it is in relation to chance or causality. That is, the fact that we are recording right now at this precise moment, is it a chance event or causal?
I really like the question you asked. Look, there are great minds. Einstein, I admire Albert Einstein a lot. Albert Einstein said, there is no chance or coincidence. Everything has its causality.
God does not play dice, right? He used to say.
Exactly. What we call chance or randomness is the way in which energy, cause, universal quantum consciousness, the primary consciousness, what we call a God, acts anonymously. We do not realize it. That is, we do not interpret it. A very clear manifestation also that chance does not exist. I believe it does not exist. Everything has its cause. If you look at it, I, for example, in my life, there are so many events, I realize that one says, it cannot be so many coincidences that have happened to reach a certain point that had to be reached. That is to say, there are a series of manifestations, so I mean, what happens is that we consider it as something natural and that it had to happen. One of the aspects in which it eliminates chance is the synchronism, the synchronicity. For example, what I mentioned before between Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. Both did the same thing without connecting. One in Arizona, in the United States, and the other in England, in Oxford. And they reached the same conclusion. Later they saw each other, got together, and now work together and are good friends, etc. This synchronicity, there is a transfer of information. It is the quantum entanglement between related things. And this explains to us that there is no chance, but there is always a causality. Chance does not exist. For me, chance does not exist. There is always a hidden causality, not understood, that we do not comprehend, but everything has a causal explanation.
Where can we or how can we find happiness?
Happiness, as I have told you before, you will only and exclusively find happiness if you base your existential conception on supraconsciousness. As long as it is based on the ego, you will never be happy. The ego is managed and driven by a character, and the character is formed, structured by a series of habits that are instilled, starting to be instilled in the womb until 7, 9, 10 years old. That is when a person's character is structured. Today, in the environment we live in, materialistic, the habits we instill in our children are entirely materialistic. This conditions an exalted ego. So, these people think according to these instilled habits, and their emotional and affective life will depend on these thoughts. Thoughts generate feelings.
Okay. And another question that, well, has to do with causality and chance, and also has to do especially with the topic of reincarnation. Of course, everything has a cause, right? But then, for example, premature death or illnesses in children, would that have to do, for example, with karmic debt?
I have already told you that I am not an expert. I have read some things. Alan Kardec, this great medium, I have read his books, the Book of Mediums, the Book of the Dead. This man says that these short lives are to finish stages for people who have some time left in their life cycle to complete. I am not an expert on this. I am saying what I have read. That is, these short stages are necessary times to complete evolutions that have been left incomplete. This is what mediums say.
and I do not know this.
Okay, well,
I'm not an expert.
while we are already approaching the end, we are practically at the end. So now, I don't know what you think if I do a round of short questions.
They like this a lot.
People like it a lot because this is also a good way to reach many people, right? I don't know, people no longer consume content as they used to, but rather in small fragments.
They want things quickly, fast.
Indeed, but well, sometimes I say it. I criticize these algorithms a lot, but then I say, okay. But truly, imagine out of 1,000 people who watch a video, for example, out of 1 million, well, if 1% then goes to watch the video, the long video, and can establish foundations, it works for me and is more than enough. So I have a few, actually, there are few short questions. It can be yes or no, or well, they are short, quick response. Let's go with the first one. Does science prove that there is life after death?
Currently, yes, we have scientific means that demonstrate that after physical death, our existence continues in another dimension.
Is consciousness separate from the brain?
There is a neuronal consciousness, which we have defined as a consequence of the activity of neurons, and there is a supraconsciousness that persists despite death, which is non-local and has the ability to go beyond this.
Does karma exist?
Totally. Karma is it's in our subconscious. It's our history.
Does reincarnation exist?
For me, yes, I think so.
Does God exist?
For me, I am totally convinced that what I call God is this universal consciousness, the principle of all religions that you can name as you wish, but it exists. I am very convinced.
And has something or someone created this God?
Not at all. It is above, outside of creation. It has always existed and will always exist.
Can past lives be accessed through regression?
Totally. Hypnosis, with the regression that is achieved, this has been demonstrated by eminent psychiatrists Brian Weiss and Ian Stevenson, that it is possible to contact and know past lives.
Does chance or causality exist?
For me, causality always exists, not chance. Chance is the way the universal consciousness acts anonymously.
Is stress one of the causes of today's diseases?
Totally. Stress conditions, it is determined by the individual's personality, which is the ego. The ego and stress, for me, are the triggers for more than 90% of today's diseases.
Do heaven and hell exist?
Heaven and hell, as they have explained to us, I do not accept. There are people who carry good karma and others not so good or very bad karma. And then these are levels that will determine evolution, and therefore reincarnations should be more or less frequent. But this about heaven and hell, all these things, I do not believe in it.
Okay, well, to finish up, doctor, before, I don't know, since we have enough time, it's 1:08. I don't know if you mind if I show you a short video of 7 minutes.
Yes, sir.
It's Cesar Viral. I don't know if you know him, a renowned historian and communicator.
I've heard of him, but I don't know him.
In which he recounts a near-death experience. So I don't know if we can watch it with you. And well, you can, if you want, comment afterward. And if you want,
I'm very interested.
Great. Well, I'm going to play it for you.
You say, I know how I am going to die. Yes, and I have also had an experience of being at death's door. It did not seem unpleasant to me, quite the opposite. And at a certain moment, I decided to lie down. And while I was lying down, suddenly I found myself in a place where there were people I knew. Some had died a long time ago, and they were telling me to come over to their side. And at that moment, when they told me to come to their side, I thought about whether to go or not. In fact, I looked at the ground. There was a small stream that I could cross just by jumping. And when I was thinking about it, suddenly I heard a noise, huge. The air conditioner in the bedroom where I was broke down, and that woke me up. But I woke up with a huge headache. I say, Mason, I hadn't been able to cross to the other side, but I woke up with a terrible headache. And when I leave the room, I meet the owner of the house, who tells me I look pitiful and says, Shume, you are very unwell. I say, no, my head hurts, but it hurts a lot. It's true, but nothing more. And then he decided to take me to have my blood pressure checked here in the United States. At the fire stations, they check your blood pressure. There are paramedics, and they provide this type of service for free. My blood pressure was through the roof, so the paramedic told me, go to the emergency room at the hospital right now. I went to the emergency room and they admitted me immediately and said, look, with the blood pressure you have now, you have been on the verge of a stroke. I personally believe that if I had jumped into that river and joined those people, some of whom were dead and I knew them and they were calling me to go with them, I would have died that afternoon from a stroke.
From your perspective, there was also a reason for the air conditioning to break down.
Coincidence, causality, in short. If you're thinking, gosh, this guy is crazy, well, I understand and respect your opinion, but I personally am convinced that what ultimately prevents me from taking the leap, and therefore I stay here. But the air conditioning broke down in such a way that the owner of the house is still wondering what happened.
He had a near-death experience, this man.
This is a near-death experience. Indeed he did. He certainly did.
And he tells it very well. He show people what they say, the way of explaining it and such. Well, it changes depending on the cultural level. This is a very cultured person, and the religious beliefs. But they explain it. Suddenly for him it was gone. He saw this a feeling, he said, of peace, of tranquility, of well-being, that he was well. You saw known people who were dead and deceased, right? And what they tell you, some say they are ashen. Others, if they cross a river, or if you cross definitively and stay there and don't return, or you do return.
Do you think that if you had crossed the river, you would have died?
It is one of the ways to symbolically express that you do not return and stay in the other dimension, or you come back to finish your life cycle in the human situation, which is three-dimensional. Some express it in one way and say that the beings of light ask them. Others talk about a river. If I cross the river, I do not return.
And if I don't cross the river, I return.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think with this, honestly, it has been, I think without any doubt, one of the best interviews that we have had. I always say that I don't like to say the best so as not to undervalue the rest of the guests who also have their...
Each one contributes their knowledge and experiences, and all have value and merit.
Indeed. But well, I can only thank you, Doctor. I had a great time, and I learned, a lot. So thank you very much. It has been a real pleasure to meet you. And well, also to tell the audience, thank you very much for being behind the screen. We hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if you want to say something to say goodbye, Doctor.
Yes, I like to end these talks with a quote from someone I respect a lot, which is Ortega y Gasset. Ortega y Gasset said, "The good teacher is not the one who provides a wealth of concepts to their audience, but the one who, along with the wealth of concepts, awakens the critical spirit." I tell you this because the people who watch this interview should not dogmatically believe what I have said. Doubt, seek information, reason about what we have said, reach your own conclusions. That is what is important and will truly have value and lasting impact in your minds. If you believe it as dogma, the one who structures their character on dogmas always needs a leader. Indeed, he is no longer free. They are instilling ideas in him. And this is not freedom. This is not authenticity. And authenticity with oneself is only achieved when one is rationally convinced of an idea, then it is accepted.
Everything we have said, I beg you please to rationalize it deeply, and when you are convinced, believe it. If you are not, do not believe it.
Phenomenal. And well, with this great phrase, quoting Ortega, whom I also like a lot, we conclude the interview. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I hope you liked it. I hope you all liked it. See you next week with a new episode. And I remind you, as a brief conclusion, that you can subscribe and share the interview if you liked it. So that's it. Bye.